Mont Blanc. It is Tuesday, August 29th. It's officially UTMB week. We have two racers in our presence here this morning, and we've got a fantastic panel here to discuss the rich 20-year history of the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc. Doug Meyer here at the end of the table here.
Hi.
Keith Byrne in the center. Topher Gaylord, a star-studded group of historians of the UTMB. And we're going to go into deep detail on all the amazing stories that have emerged over the last 20 years. But maybe quickly, I just gave you guys a very quick intro. Doug, maybe just say a few words about yourself. Tell us about your book and
Sure.
what makes you important to the UTMB
I've been
story.
living in Chamonix now full-time for 6 years. I'm originally from the White Mountains back in New Hampshire. I run the trail running company Run the Alps. There's the shameless plug. And I wrote the book, The Race That Changed Running, the Inside Story of UTMB. So I got a chance over the last year to really dig very, very deep. And big thanks to these two guys for all kinds of stories that are in there. Yeah. So this was just a wonderful journey.
Yeah, all three of us are featured in your book.
Oh,
Me less
Dylan,
so than
of
these
course.
two, but
Yeah, actually some key information from you, very helpful. Yeah.
It's a great book. It's
Thanks.
fantastic, and it's structured in a way that, you can sort of set it down and pick it back up and revisit it at any interval, usually probably once a year for a lot of us going forward.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be nice.
And just for our viewing and listening audience, Doug is going to need to leave before we are done, so we'll make sure we get plenty of contributions from you in the next 30 minutes or so.
Thanks.
Keith Byrne, maybe give us a quick thumbnail sketch of your history here.
Oh, yeah. So, Doug, the book is brilliant, and there's been quite a few. There's actually have been a few UTMB books over the years, but this one is actually in terms of storytelling and how easy it is to kind of consume, as Debo said, come in and out. It's a really good read. So there we go. I don't need any royalties. I just think, and also as we prepare to do the live commentary for the rest of this week, the book has been great to kind of remind me of some of the stories that I've perhaps forgotten in the past. So thumbs up to that. So I've been at the UTMB every year since 2004. I've appeared at the UTMB in all kinds of ways, either trying to run, and I've finished a couple of times. I also worked for the North Face forever, and so we were the kind of founding sponsor. So I've had the pleasure of working with Catherine and Michelle, and then more recently, once we stepped away, I got the opportunity to work in the UTMB live studio. And so every year, with all kinds of wonderful folks, we get to share UTMB with everyone around the world, and it never ever gets boring. And so I'm excited about this podcast, but even more excited about being with Corinne and a few other folk at the end of this week. So, high energy here this morning in the podcast studio.
Yeah. We'll preview the broadcast a little later on, but I'm sure your voice is really familiar to a lot of our listeners, and it's great to have you here.
Well, that's always the classic thing. When I'm sat with Debo and Corinne in the studio, everyone's like, who's the British guy? So it's like, we know who Debo and Corinne is, and I'm okay. And one of the great things about this is that, a bit like trail running, on the start line, the mid-packers can be with their heroes, and that's kind of how I equate my presence in the UTMB live studio.
I love it. Nice. Thank you, Keith. Topher, last but not least.
So I guess Chamonix has become a second home to myself and Kim since 2003, since the very beginning of UTMB. So I've been coming here since literally 2003 every year. And it's, the UTMB, Katrina, Michelle, and their family, their 4 generations of family are our French family. And we've got, just to show how transformative this event has been for the Gaylord family, we have 18 Gaylords here this week for the 20th anniversary. I'm the youngest of 10, and we've got 8 siblings here to soak in the different races, and we've got the next generation racing this year. So this is about tradition, it's about shared experiences, and it's about bonds for life, and it's great to be here celebrating 20 years.
Yeah, and we should mention that both Doug and Topher did race the MCC yesterday, so it's a sort of overcast morning here in the Chamonix Valley, and I'm sure you guys are happy to sit around and chat and drink coffee a little bit rather than be out in the mountains. With
It's a lot nicer right now than it was yesterday at this time when we were in Martigny wondering how much snow there was going to be up at Colbalm.
Yeah.
It's so cool. The MCC is, it's a race for the organizers. So, obviously all the 10 communities put in an enormous amount of volunteer effort. And the idea of this race was to give back to the community by creating a race for the community. So the only way into the race, you got to have a zip code within one of the surrounding communities, or you need to somehow be part of the UTMB family,
Yeah.
which I don't have a zip code in the area, but like I said, the end of August, I do live in a zip code. So the race is, it's a beautiful race from Martigny to Chamonix, and it's just about a marathon, mountain marathon. And they put it on with all of the energy of one of the primetime races, and it feels like it. It was very cool, and it was super tricky conditions yesterday, which made it really fun.
Awesome.
It also, for those of us who live here in the valley, it has this really nice local vibe too. You're seeing friends, you're seeing UTMB volunteers. There's just a really good sort of, it has, like you say, all the spirit and energy of any other UTMB race. And if you live here, gens de pays, as they say, or if you volunteer, you see all these faces that you know. So it's got a whole nother level to it. It's really a wonderful event.
Fun. Cool. Well, I want to go back to the very beginning, but before we do so, I have to thank our sponsors. I have to get the administrative stuff done, and a big thank you to both Hoka and Camelback for their generous support of Good Morning Mont Blanc and all of our content efforts here this week. Of course, they are great supporters of the UTMB and the UTMB World Series, and they're also great supporters of us here at Freetrail. Hoka, of course, born here in the Alps, so trail running is in the DNA, and we're really proud to be working with them. We're only a few steps away from their base camp here in the Expo, which I think sort of opens today. I can't wait to go look at all the great products at the Expo later today. Of course, Camelback too. If you're interested in coming to Camelback's event here in Chamonix on Thursday night, we have information about that in the Freetrail Instagram story, so make sure you go check that out. Of course, Camelback, the inventors of the hydration pack category, and still great innovators in that space after so many decades. And so, yeah, big thank you to them for their support of the shows here this week. So again, going back to the very beginning of the UTMB, Toph, maybe let's go back to you. Maybe just give us a sense of course, you were working for the North Face at the time, managing the European business, sort of opening the European business here, and identified this race as being a great opportunity to showcase the brand, showcase the brand's products. What gave you that insight? How did you come to be connected with Katrina Michelle?
Well, I mean, it's a crazy story. In 2003, I had moved over to Europe to run the North Face brand in 2000, and I was in search of a 100-mile trail race, and really, trail racing was all shorter distance. It was an era of sky races at the time, and there weren't really very many ultra races and virtually no 100-mile races really on the continent, trail races. So there are 24-hour races, 100Ks on the road, and I was always flying over to run Western States, jet-lagged, like squeezing in, passing out somewhere in the canyons, and then muscling my way to the finish, and was constantly in search of a 100-miler, and came across on a website, actually, the UTMB, and I just knew instantly, like, run around the rooftop of Europe through 3 countries and connect a full circle. The aesthetic alone of it was just absolutely pulled me to the event. So I signed up immediately, and then I sent a note to our French team. I didn't want to be the heavy-handed American, like telling the team what to partner with, because it was a personal passion. And I sent a note to the team running our French business, and they immediately were like, we have to become involved in this event. And I really give enormous kudos to Carla and Franco. Franco, now the CEO of Solomon, and Carla. I think Doug writes about Carla a little bit in the book as well. And they were amazing. They were instrumental in getting us connected that first year. And Kim, my wife, and I did a 3-day training tour. Like that was foundational to how I prepared. We'd always do a 3-day tour du Mont Blanc every year, and we started before the very first year as part of the training block.
Did you have a sense of what this was going to become? Because you've been here every edition for 20 years, and I mean, it's an absolute spectacle now.
Yeah, I mean, it was an adventure. That first year, they technically had a finish. If you made it to Courmayeur, you were considered a finisher. If you made it to Champay, you were considered a finisher. So at that point, it was this adventure into the total unknown. Like no race had ever been run around the Mont Blanc. Some people had sort of, FKT'd the concept, but it hadn't been done. So I didn't have an idea of what it would become, but I just knew, like, if you just look at it on paper, it's just the most beautiful aesthetic line or trail you could ever imagine doing. And that in itself just drew me to it, and I knew it would draw anyone that came to it.
And you've started 11 times. Doug, maybe this is a good thing for you here too. In your book, you talk about sort of that original founding moment, and part of it was sort of born from tragedy. Why don't you tell the people about that?
Yeah, well, in 2000, we had the Mont Blanc tunnel fire, which, disconnected Courmayeur from Chamonix, and, everything was closed. There had been these relay races around, Mont Blanc, and I don't know, were you aware of those, or had you done it?
I didn't know the relay races.
Yeah. So, but nobody had ever done a continuous run all the way around, and the relay races were really focused more on, road, and the trail running at that period was coming into ascendance. And there was this cry of more trail, less road. And it was really a small group here in Chamonix. Once the tunnel reopened, they said, let's restart this race, but let's do it differently. Let's do it as a continuous race. We can see who goes all the way around. And let's try to get onto the trails for it. And it was really one person, René Bachelard, who is not very well known, who at that time was the president of the Chamonix CMBM, which was the local trail running club, which continues to this day and has something like 300 members, probably one of the biggest trail running clubs in the world. Yeah. And René kept bumping into Michel in the streets of Chamonix and saying, we've got to have a meeting, we've got to have a meeting, we've got to have a meeting. And finally, Michel broke down. He was active in CMBM. And they called a meeting. And they had in that group like a superstar cast of people who could pull something like this off. So it was really quite a remarkable moment. And now this was 2002. And they, organized, and so the tunnel had been reopened, and so there could be something like this. It would have essentially been impossible to, organize a race like this without the Mont Blanc tunnel. And the tunnel reopened, this high-energy organizing group, and it just kind of took off. Catherine built this very simple website. And they had a record store at the time on Avenue Aiguille Midi. She had some free time available, and she started, she was like the volunteer organizer of it all. Michel was out on the trails. Now, this is a period that, you got to understand. For example, one of the really classic parts of the course that we know now, from Bertoni to Bonatti, did not even exist.
Really? The trail wasn't there?
Trail wasn't there. They actually went down in the valley on that section.
That's like one of the best stretches of the whole course.
I know, right? It's like hard to imagine that was not even there. So Michel went out, and he spent a tremendous amount of time just exploring. He gave the name to the spot Tête Avant, which unfortunately we can't use this year for other reasons, Montfauve, and and he pieced it all together, with friends, obviously. Catherine built the website, and they thought they might have 100 or 200 people who were crazy enough to try this. The start line had 700 plus. Yeah. So clearly they knew they were onto something.
Including Mr. Topher Gaylord, who finished second place.
Including a certain Mr. Topher Gaylord.
So Keith, maybe going a little bit deeper on Catherine and Michel. I know you've developed a special relationship with them over the years. Doug just mentioned that they owned a record shop in town, and now They are the race directors of the world's biggest trail event and obviously integral. They passed off the CEO role to somebody else now, but building this UTMB World Series also. What makes them a powerful team, and any other insights about your relationship with them?
Well, I think Catherine and Michelle, and Doug, I think, has done a great job in trying to help people understand Catherine and Michelle in the book, because there's a lot of people, they've made their kind of assumptions and conclusions about the two of them based on maybe what's been written in the press more than actually personal experience. And I think Catherine and Michelle, it's the dynamic duo, if you like, a fantastic couple together. And like most winning couples, they complement each other, completely different. You know, Catherine is the flamboyant, definitely doesn't hold back with any of her thoughts. They are not, there's no airbrushing of that. It's, straight talking. Whilst Michelle is kind of like the peacemaker, the creative one. But actually, when it's necessary, he will stand up and say, Catherine, I think you're wrong. And there's not many people not many people in this world that have said that and survived to tell the story. And so, I think it's from my personal experience, and I've seen Catherine and Michelle build an incredibly strong relationship with Topher and Kim on a personal level. And actually, it was quite funny. So, I feel like the relationship I had with them was much more about, I was almost like a diplomat between the North Face at the time and the UTMB, or specifically Catherine, because Catherine had a very clear vision about what she wanted to achieve. And the North Face also had an idea about how we could help. And they didn't always quite make sense. And so I was constantly trying to explain to one side or the other what they were trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And I think Catherine kind of respected that. And but even to this day, if my phone rings right now, I know, and it's got Catherine Poletti written on it, I know there's something that she's quite not happy about. And I'm like, okay, what have the gang done this time? And in a way, even though I'm in Colorado now, Catherine knows that she can pick up the phone anytime, and I will help her resolve whatever the thing is. So I think for me anyway, it's been fun seeing her. And also, I think more and more people have got a better understanding of who she is. And my funniest story is like in Boulder, where I live now, is you're not allowed to smoke on the street. So Catherine and Michelle were here last year. They came for dinner. And then after the dinner, like here in Chamonix, Catherine's outside smoking like a chimney. And somebody said, "You're not from here." And Catherine's like, "Oh, why do you know that?" I said, "Because you're not allowed to smoke here." So in good Catherine style, she's kind of like sucking on that cigarette as quickly as she could before she got into trouble. So I think 20 years of UTMB is the ultimate testament to those two people, the way they've worked together. And they, the perception of them is that they are millionaires living in this amazing house somewhere. And as the story unfolds, you realize that they continued, the money that was being generated by the race was continuously reinvested back into it, much to the horror perhaps of some financial advisors. So it's a passion. Talking about a passion project, this is like a mega passion project for those two.
I plan to get to this later, but Doug, I know you're on a tight time schedule, so maybe let's get to this now about like the reinvestment into the race.
Super interesting, because there is this idea out here, which I think makes a certain amount of sense, right? This is a big display of pageantry and takes over the entire town, and you think whoever must be at the top of this, like they must be totally raking it in. And it is a big business, there's no doubt about it. We have to say that, and we have to say with Ironman now especially, it's it's a multinational corporation, right? I mean, but money. Very clearly, I did about 20 hours of interviews with the Polettis, and we did about 50 other interviews with some help. And, they're motivated by, quite a lot of things. They're clearly ambitious, clearly really smart. Michelle, both of them also saw how some trail races over the years, Templier and others, Diagonal de Fou, very important races still to this day. Mm-hmm. But they had their moment at the pinnacle, and then I think we can honestly say they're not there now, and they always wanted to avoid that happening to this really special run around Mont Blanc, and so They moved back here. I have time to tell this quick anecdote. They moved back to Chamonix from university. And the choice at the time was to go to Paris, where Michelle was going to take a programming job, or come back to Chamonix to the mountains. And as a friend of Catherine said at the time, the choice is antidepressants or going back to the mountains. Yeah. And so they moved back here, and they did not have a lot of money. And Michelle's father was just retiring from running, business. They took over the garage. They turned the garage into a chalet. And this is where they live today. You walk into the chalet and there's this very modern looking sunken, living room area. That's where they change the oil on the trucks.
Yeah.
They have one car, a little electric, Renault Zoe. Money for them has not been the driving factor, as you might imagine.
Isn't there an anecdote in the book about how in 2020 they ended up in a tight economic position because they had been reinvesting into the race and not necessarily pulling
the long-term strategy? I mean, this is very much a homegrown business. Yeah. And the long-term strategy was, on the years when they made money, they poured it back into the business. And there were years when they didn't make money. And now that works great if you're a mom and pop business.
It's so counterintuitive, we should say, to the folks who are going to be listening and watching, who have especially been here at UTMB.
Oh, yeah.
To know that it may have not been profitable certain years.
Oh yeah, right. And also that the profits were relatively small in those days. Yeah. And so along comes at one point Remy Duchemin, who's had worked for the company that owned Tour de France, and it's in the book, but they were interested in trail running. He meets the Polettis, and he looks at the finances and says, this is a little crazy. Like, you don't have any reserves here. A company your size needs, reserves. And so the financial sophistication came a little bit later in the process.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super interesting. Maybe before...
Debo, I was going to jump in. Just one other thing I was just thinking of now is that whenever any company that we kind of connect with or brands that we wear, we normally connect it to the purpose and values of those. And throughout the years, whenever we had some strong discussions with Michelle and Catherine, the one thing that they always defaulted to was the values of trail running and the values that they were trying to create. So I think that was just one thing I just wanted to say. Even to this day, Catherine and Michelle, everything they've been driven by, that kind of their North Star was what they believed was the spirit of trail running. And I think Killian articulated it quite well in terms of saying, the UTMB is a great race. Would that be the race that I would put on? Not necessarily, because it's not necessarily my values, but I think through the 20 years, if you like, their North Star was always these clear kind of values and guide of trail running, the spirit of trail running. And Catherine, and it was hard to argue with that whenever you were having a tough conversation with you going, well, that's against the spirit of trail running, as Catherine was saying. I think that's been another kind of, if you like, all the way through. They've been very clear from day one. Yeah. These are the values of trail running that we're committed to, and that's where they've gone.
The very first brochure for UTMB, even before it was called UTMB, had a statement of the values of the trail. And we can disagree about what those values are.
And a lot of people do.
And a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And there's an entire
book.
podcast devoted to this. But they were there. And you talk to Michelle in particular, who's run 80 plus ultras, about trail running, and he tears up. I mean, this is like, you cannot say that they are not passionate about trail running. And so disagreements come. We've seen some of them this year, but there's definitely, as Keith said, like an absolute North Star there that has guided them, and we may all disagree. A good example is in the first edition and in early editions, there was an idea that everybody would get exactly the same prize. Now that's a wonderful thought, and but the world changes, right?
Yeah.
And so you end up in this situation where there's no prize money going out to people who are training all year and working incredibly hard. And Tim Tollefson makes the case very clearly and articulately in the book that in all due respect, you got to shift your thinking here.
Yeah.
So there's an understanding of where some of these issues come from that are grounded in DNA of the race.
So, Toph, I want to get your comments on Katrina Michelle specifically too, because I know you have a special relationship with them. But Doug, I know you got to leave here in a few minutes. We were just talking about the economic impact of the event on this community, a community that's important to you. So maybe say a few words about that before we let you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important. Living here year round, you see the ebb and flow of the economy, and it's a tourist economy. You all, of course, and me for many years, saw this thriving, hopping, packed Chamonix. Now, come the Monday after UTMB, we always joke, locals, it's the sound of, wheels, luggage wheels leaving town. And the scaffolding goes up. There's this window of renovation, when people do all of their work on their shops until, ski season. But it's really, really quiet. And before UTMB, it's hard for us to wrap our brain around this, but the summer season really wound down around mid-August. And it was apparently very, very quiet then. And what UTMB has done has been an incredible boost to the economy in a period when things were really pretty dead. And I'm part of a world now with Run the Alps and with others that you now see. Okay, so end of August is one of the biggest periods for not just Chamonix, too, the whole region, the Espace Mont Blanc, as they call it. And so it's a huge shot in the arm for the economy. And now what we see is, trail runners coming, wanting to experience
for the whole summer.
Courses the whole summer. Yeah. So.
But you said 23 million this week.
Something like that, yeah. And you talk to shopkeepers, and they're delighted to have this week. Of
course.
Obviously, the valley overflows with people, and there are all kinds of issues around that.
Yeah.
And I think everybody acknowledges that. So there's a real tension there.
Yeah. It's a balance, and I should say, Harmony and I came up to Chamonix in October last year, and it was dead quiet, and it was such a change of pace. And we also this year put a lot of effort. Harmony put a lot of effort into trying to organize like a Freetrail event at like a bar or a restaurant or something, and we couldn't find any availability.
They're all closed.
Everybody's already been bought out by other brands and stuff. So there is a tension there, and we should be honest about that. But it's also really cool, and it's good for the local economy that depends on tourism. So even though they probably are really happy to see everybody go after UTMB week.
There's a really interesting point to make here too, which is the tourism office worked with the cell phone company Orange to try and study exactly what was going on. Because these days, the way you track people and track numbers is by seeing how many cell phones are in an area. Yeah. So what happens here that's maybe different from other big events is that it brings the usual huge swarm of people to the valley. But for UTMB, they're actually really concentrated. So they're concentrated right by the start line, the finish line for all the races, by the mayor's office, and downtown. So it is very congested there. Mm-hmm. So they're all, the mayor's office, tourism office, UTMB are exploring ideas about how they can manage that congestion with different ways of moving people around. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Doug, thanks so much for coming in. I know you got to get going soon. Sure. So maybe just one more quick plug for your book. The race that changed running. It's a deep history of UTMB, everything we're talking about now and much more. So look it up online. We'll put a link to it in the show notes of this show. And
thanks a lot.
Podcast and YouTube.
Good to be with you guys.
Have a great adventure out there on the trails.
I will.
Wish you could stay longer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're doing an overnight trip with Chrissy Mail, former champion.
We're meeting Chrissy at the train station and the rest of our group, and we're escaping the scene here for an overnight.
Yeah, cool. Check out Run the Alps too, Doug's business here that puts on a lot of great trail adventures for people like us.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks,
Thanks,
Dylan.
Doug.
Thanks,
Enjoy, Doug.
everyone.
Yeah.
All right, catch you guys later. Bye-bye.
All right, so Topher, back to you. You've been quiet here for a little bit. We just talked a bunch about Katrina and Michelle, and I know you have a great relationship with them. So anything you want to build on from what Doug and Keith were saying? And also, I think it's important to mention their daughter, too, who has been sort of like the technical whiz behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on Doug and Keith's comments, I mean, at the core, and this will be hard for people to believe, this event is still mom and pop organization. I mean, it was a mom and pop organization from its origins. It's a family-run business. 2 generations of the family today, but 3 soon will be involved. So Katrine and Michelle's daughter Isabel is now the race director of all the finals races, and then their son David runs all of the global live trail business as well. And what people don't know, so Michelle, he studied in university, and Doug alluded to it, computer science, which is basically, ITIS. And so when you think about the origins of the event, they're running a record store. Katrine has a deep family history in music. And there were 5 organizers, Katrine and the 4 others, and the 4 others wanted to all run that first year. So by default, Katrine became the race director because she wasn't planning on running. And I think what makes UTMB so unique and what's built over the years is you think about someone who's always, Katrine has a sister that's in the Paris Symphony Orchestra, plays musical instruments. The whole family is extremely musically inclined. And so Katrine always viewed, I think from the very beginning, the experience for people, spectators, crews, the general public was so important. She if you think about the UTMB course as an arena or a stadium, she wanted to bring everyone in. And I think that gets somehow misconstrued in ways where, God, why do they have this build up? Like all of the theme music, that emotion you have at the start, those are so carefully selected theme songs.
I have goosebumps right now just thinking about the start line music.
Yeah.
Keith and I were talking about this too. Keep going, Toph. I want to
Yeah.
but I think it's important for people to know that psychology was brought to sport competition
Exactly.
of like art and music.
Exactly.
And it has once you sort of realize that and understand it, you can see it more clearly.
Yeah, everything clicks,
Yeah.
right? It's not like, what are they trying to optimize this for money? No, the idea was let's optimize this for the experience of everyone. Whether you're a spectator, like you hear the music, and they bring in these bands that play music, and it's like going to a Cirque du Soleil in advance of the big event. And that's something they had never brought. I mean, even Jamil in Aravaipa talks about how he came to UTMB and thought, this is cool ideas for me, and how he's built it with Javelina and some of these other races in North America. And so the idea of creating theater alongside the actual event was I think born out of their and especially Katrine's desire to pull in everyone, not just make it an experience for the runner, but make it an experience for anyone who's coming in contact with the
It's
event.
part of the reason why the race starts at 6 p.m. It's so the winner
exactly right.
arrives here in Chamonix in the middle of the day when everybody is off.
So they can be celebrated,
in the
right?
pedestrian mall to greet the heroes as they make their lap around Mont Blanc. Keith, you and I were talking earlier in the week. Of course, you guys were instrumental at the North Face in getting the race off the ground. Of course, the brands have graduated. It's now a Hoka event, but there was a culture within the organization that you guys were integral in at the North Face of inviting your colleagues to participate as well. So maybe talk about that, how you guys were recognizing your colleagues and encouraging them to be out in the mountains too.
Okay, I think this is going to be a team story, but I'll kick it off. And I think Topher's normally he's normally the bit like how him and Kim work so well. Topher has great ideas and Kim executes them. I think, and I kind of feel like I'm the North Face equivalent of Kim, perhaps, if that's
we
one
wanted
way.
Kim to join us this
that
morning.
is
We
true.
should say.
No, exactly. So, obviously Topher's passion for trail running, and that was great for the North Face here in Europe, coming over here, and his passion for trail running. And so what's great about Topher as well is that he wants everyone else to experience that. And I'm not the crazy guy. I mean, I'm not the crazy guy running 100 miles, or if I am, let's see how we can do that. So, and it's almost, everybody needs that encouragement. And I think that's one of the great things about UTMB. You can stand on the finish line on Sunday, the golden hour if you want, and you see people coming in, and if you've never even thought about trail running, go, well, if that person can do it, because they look absolutely, I could do it. So Toph's kind of roundabout way internally was like, well, let's encourage more people to give this a go. And this was as the race was starting to go from just the UTMB, but then adding in the CCC, so 100K. So that was almost accessible for some folks. And so Toph kind of threw down the gauntlet. He was the boss at the North Face that, hey, let's, cowbells are synonymous with the Alps, and especially when you're going up the Bovine climb, you hear the cowbells. So the cowbells are synonymous here. So Topher decided that if anybody at the North Face who comes to the event and signs up for the race at the next gathering, which was normally our sales meeting in the fall, you would get a cowbell. And this cowbell, it wasn't just a cowbell, it had the leather strap on it, and on that strap would be the North Face Exploration Award. And so whilst the finishing vest was a big deal for anyone coming across the finish line of any of the races, the cowbell in front of your colleagues back at the North Face was almost like next level recognition. And then I'm going to let one more thing, and then I'm going to let Toph jump in. And so this became, this was the big deal. And then the years that somebody from the North Face started the race and DNF'd, their first reaction was, I'm not going to get the cowbell. And that, the cowbell, that's what it was. And so it was, the cowbell was synonymous of Topher's energy for getting outdoors and trying new things and inspiring so many other people to do that. And there was examples, someone like Gianluca, Paul Hunt, they did the CCC every year just for another cowbell. It was just like, guys, try something else. Yeah. But yeah, so Topher, I don't know what's your perspective in all of that?
That's a great summary. And Keith was certainly an enormous partner in helping build internal energy inside our brand. We were talking about the other day, like the culture inside the brand at that time, you go back to the early 2000s, was, I don't know, like religion. It was like cultish almost. Yeah. And so, as Keith mentioned, that first year at UTMB, imagine climbing the ravine. The weather was horrible. You're in this fog. Your headlamp is reflecting off the fog, and all you hear are these bovine cowbells, or the cows. I mean, I remember that like it was yesterday. Yeah. And so, the top finishers, top 10 now, always get a cowbell. And we really wanted to give that experience to North Face employees and colleagues that came and finished. So we actually had 2 awards. We gave an award, and we would honor everyone at our fall sales meeting in October. And so it was a big deal. Like, we'd bring them all on the stage. We had the UTMB music playing, and we first... we honored all of the finishers with a Chamonix. I remember talking about it because, they go, well, we've got this Italian cowbell. Nope, it's got to be the one from the Chamonix Valley. Very important. And I want the big ones that the top finishers finish. And so we'd bring all of the finishers up, ringing their cowbells. We'd honor all the people that even if they didn't finish, they had the courage to start, because we thought it was important that people took the risk out of their busy, working life to just have the courage to go to the start line. And we'd bring them up, and then we would bring up everyone who came to the event, even in support, whether they volunteered, whether they came and worked a trade show booth, whether they crewed, and everyone would be on the stage. And pretty soon, anyone that was sitting in the audience was like, I need to be there next year because I'm feeling left out. Yeah. And it was a huge motivator, and Keith did an amazing job of carrying that on, in years after I had left, and for me, it was an amazing way to connect with our employees. I mean, they would share their UTMB experiences throughout the course of the year, and we'd be in meetings in horrible parts of Europe from time to time, mostly nice parts. But when we'd all get out for a run, and because we all knew we had this site on the end of August as a goal.
So maybe coming back to the growth as we sort of sketch the history of the UTMB now. Of course, it started as just the UTMB, but you could be recognized as a finisher if you made it to Courmayeur or you made it to Champex-Lac, et cetera. Now there are several events. Maybe, Keith, if you want to provide a high-level sketch of that evolution as you observed it, adding the other distances, satisfying the demand that was clearly out there and giving different experiences to different runners.
Yeah, it was always interesting. After each UTMB, sitting down with Katrina and the team, reviewing everything, and then getting ready for the next lottery. So there was qualifying points in the beginning, and there was too many people applying for the race. So every year it's like, let's increase the qualifying points, and that'll reduce the applicants. But no, everybody just went and got more qualifying points. So UTMB 2003, then by 2006, let's have this second race, the 100K race from Courmayeur. And then... CCC, sorry, yeah. And then 2008, those runners that kept coming back each year to do UTMB were like, hey, we need a new challenge. And so that's where the PTL came from. So the not necessarily one that's not really a race, a challenge that normally starts on the Monday, 300 kilometers, 25,000 meters of positive elevation, almost like a hut-to-hut experience. And teams of 3 and 2 members of that team had to have finished the UTMB. So it was almost,
it's almost like that TNF sales meeting. It's like, it's a unique fraternity of people who are
100. And it was in a way, it was customer focused. And so the customers were saying, we want something different. Yeah. And then at some point, Switzerland's like, hey, we need a race to start in Switzerland. So you've got one in Courmayeur, you've got plenty in Chamonix. So that was where the OCC came along and that 50K race. And so then there's the YCC involved in the younger generation. There's the mini races for the young kids between 4 and 11. So
the MCC, the community race we already talked about. TDS is happening now.
And now there's the ETC, so you can explore Courmayeur as well. So there's actually now 8 races. I think we're encompassing 11,000 runners, and then that brings all of the supporters that go with it. So they've evolved the race, and that's kind of, I can just hear Catherine and Michelle now. This is the spirit of trail running. We want to be inclusive, and how do we involve more people whilst being still manageable of what's going on here? And then with things like UTMB Live, for all those people that can't be here, a bit like Formula One, you can watch it around the world. And so you can almost, and the quality of that content now in 2023 means that, we know some of our audience like, hey, I'm on the treadmill for hours and hours watching the commentary of UTMB. So they're almost trying to get in the mindset. So they've evolved their product to the demands of the customers. And yeah, it's just so powerful to have seen it happen in 20 years as well.
I want to talk with you specifically about the evolution of the broadcast experience because you've been involved since day one. But let's pause on the PTL story a little bit because it's, I think, relevant to our conversation about the artistic influence and the thought that goes into all the decisions that they make. Tell the significance about the name PTL.
Well, first of all, with the Ironman group involved now, they're looking at this going, why have you guys got so many acronyms? Why can't you just call it the 50, the 100, and the 100 mile? And we know the answer to that. This is more than a number. And there's the storytelling behind it. And I think that's where Katrin and Michelle come in as well, is the storytelling of everything. So, UTMB is obvious where that's come from, and they register that as a trademark. Then the CCC is pretty clear. But then, and then I remember when Katri said, "Oh, we're going to have the PTL." I'm like, "What?" I'm thinking, which town begins with P? And it's I know. So the PTL is La Petite Trotte de Léon. Virtually nobody knows who's Leon. And so, bizarrely enough, Leon Lovey, one of these trailers that's part of the connection. So if Michel Poletti's the man on the ground here in Chamonix, Alberto was the guy on the ground in Courmayeur. And then Leon, who's a chef, was the guy on the ground in Champex-Lac. And so when you're running alongside the lake, after you've gone out the checkpoint on the left-hand side, a slight false flat, there's a cake shop on the left-hand side. There's always these blueberry cakes outside, and that is the cake shop of Leon. So they have named a race after one of the trailers on the mountain, and so that's the PTL. as a name, and then the TDS. Do you want me to do that one?
Well, I think it's just funny to point out that it basically means in French, the little walk of Leon. And it's a 200-mile like Vision Quest slog through the Alps where you have to carry a helmet. So it's not a little walk by any means.
And Leon absolutely adores Sebastian Chenier.
Yeah.
It's like if you go to the cake show with Seb, the red carpet just rolls out the door. So, but no, great guy, still going strong, like a lot of these characters are.
Somebody's got to make a documentary about him. Were you going to say something, Toph?
No, I mean, that's a favorite spot. You know, we used to do a tour in training basically every July, and we'd always sleep in Champélac, and every morning that second day was always that was the start of the third day back to Chamonix. And Leon would always be in his cake shop and have fresh cakes for everyone that was running.
Grab
that
breakfast
morning.
on the way out.
Yeah, and so you start to build. I think the other thing, you know, on all the villages, you know, certainly we built enduring relationships with shop owners, restaurateurs, hut owners.
I mean,
and
as your friend, I mean, you are one of the people who introduced this race to me, and we've been coming here together for nearly a decade now. And now I've become sort of like the second generation of people building on the relationships that you started. It's amazing.
And Rhodes is going to be Rhodes is going to be right there. We're going to be following Rhodes in his traditions he's building. But
I want to come back to the tour, and because you guys sort of also, you know, kind of pioneered the training loop around Mont Blanc. But maybe Keith, finish up on TDS too, because I think this is also a fun story on the name. Yeah,
and I think it's acknowledged out of all the races, the TDS is probably the most technical of all the races. And again, you know, for those who've been over on the Courmayeur side, it's like, oh wow, everybody speaks French over here as well. And so, or patois, as they would refer to it over that side. And so the TDS is on the tracks, on the former tracks of the Duke of Savoy. And so both Chamonix and Courmayeur, this whole region used to be, before they had country borders that we know today, this was part of a region, the Duke of Savoy, that was his area, and this was like, I think, for 400 years, between the 1400s and the 1800s. And so, again, Catherine wanted to tell that story about this area, and then that also would have been, before the tunnel existed, that was how you kind of got around this. So this would have been like a trading route, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that course also follows some of the classic climbs that you see in the Tour de France every year. So the Cormet de Roselin on that side, the descent down to Bourg Saint-Maurice, the climb over the Petit Saint-Bernard. So yeah, really tough course. Some exposed sections on that, and then also you get to, there's the big fort. So you know that border between the French and the Italians. So they weren't always best friends. Yeah. And so so there's a lot of history here going back through centuries. And so again, that's just Catherine and Michelle doing their little bit of storytelling and almost acknowledging the history of this region. So it's on the track of the Duke of Savoy, basically, is TDS. Anyway, I think there's a lot of people who probably don't realize that. Going back to what we were just talking about, Toph, I mean, you were kind of a unique American here, and so you had both the understanding of American trail running culture. You're a 7-time Western States finisher. You've been involved in, you know, the sport in our home country for decades now, but you were living here in Europe managing the North Face brand. And so you got to see trail running culture emerge in Europe too. And one of the things that has stuck with me for many years that I heard Joe Grant say when I was here in 2013 on my first trip to UTMB was that trail running emerged out of running in the US and emerged out of mountaineering here in Europe, which makes perfect sense when you see a race like UTMB. Even though it's not mountain climbing, it's not real alpinism, it's much different than Western States. Yeah. So maybe say a few words about that, and also just like, well, as we get into talking about, you know, Americans coming over here and starting to do the tour and training. I mean, you've been here to observe all of that, including some of the legends like Scott Jurek and Karl Meltzer. So anything you want to say about the American culture versus the European culture and how you observed it over the course of 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the European culture, the mountain towns are a part of multi-generational mountain life. And in Europe, like we had, I think when we first moved over, there were no smartphones, there were no GPSs, there were no GPS watches. It was like maps and one television station in English, which was Eurosport, that we could get. And everything was these non-mainstream, by American standards, sports that were all centered around the mountains. Nordic skiing, alpine skiing, biathlon, ski jumping, in the winter, and all of these mountain athletes, they would climb in the summer too, but there wasn't like a mountain sport that they could attack outside of like a few sky races, maybe the Davos Swiss Alpine Marathon. And so, when this event took off, it gave an avenue for these incredibly talented aerobic engine mountain athletes to converge with these incredibly talented pure running athletes. And the course on UTMB, and specifically in Europe, like the trails weren't built for horses here. They're built for humans. I mean, the whole continent was built for humans. And so at a human scale, that's why when you come into a village, it just feels so good.
Yeah.
Is built before the Industrial Revolution. And so the trails are just grindy up, grindy down, which in a lot of cases suits a mountain athlete better than a running athlete. So it wasn't, you might have a 2:15 marathoner that comes in, runs a CCC, even an OCC, and gets eaten alive relative to like, okay, a Nordic skier that suddenly is just killing it on the trail. So I think that was a big piece for that sort of was the intersection of two types of logic with trail running. And then when it came to training, there was no guidebook to training. It was all homegrown and self-made. And so if you go back to the early 2000s, probably the most professionalized endurance sport on the planet still today, arguably, is the Tour de France. And there were a lot of videos that were coming out on how Tour de France teams were training for the Tour. Mm-hmm. And it was about previewing every section of the race, doing it in advance, and building a plan. And so I loved that. And so that first year in 2003, like I modeled that exact model. And that's what initiated, even before the first year I ever ran UTMB, modeled a 3-day tour in July of the entire course. Yeah. That basically became foundational to my preparation every year.
It's your birthday tradition.
It was a birthday tradition. It was always the last week in July, and it became tradition. And it, back to what we were saying earlier, it's probably what built these enduring bonds with all of these people around the trail, around the Mont Blanc, like Leon, like Giacomo at Maison-Vieille, like Patrizia at Bouton d'Or, and all of the little spots we'd go. And, oftentimes it'd be with North Face athletes, new people. We'd bring, Americans like over. Scott Jurek came over and did a 3-day tour with us. And then did another 3-day tour with the La Fuma team. And, from year one, our goal was to bring as many Americans over to experience it, male and female top athletes. And we had, we invited Tim Tweetmeyer at the time. He was the 5-time, Western States champion. Dean Karnassus, Scott Jurek, Carl Meltzer, anyone.
Remember Jeff Rose, Dakota Jones.
Yeah, Dakota Jones. I mean, absolutely everyone. And obviously the women, American women, have had phenomenal, like absolutely phenomenal results here. We were saying, between the UK and the US, there's 13 of the 19 UTMB champions come from 8 American champions and or not champions but wins, and 5 from the UK with Lizzy Hawker, but the American men have yet to win it. So it's still that crown jewel prize for the first American male. And in the early years, like any American that would come over here, they'd be like a kid in a candy shop, and they would OD without exception the 2 weeks before the race. They just totally OD on the mountain.
It still happens.
It still happens. Like you come here, you get to Chamonix. Remember, Chamonix, you're 3,000 feet. You look at the top of the Mont Blanc. It's just under 16,000 feet. And that's more relief than sitting at the base camp of Everest looking at the top of Everest. And so you get here and you're like, I have to start running up these mountains immediately. Yeah. And so I think a lot of Americans just showed up like fatigued at the start already because they blew it out in their taper.
Yeah.
And then the nighttime start that really started, I guess, Keith, in like 2005 or maybe even 2004.
Yep.
That really changed, virtually, every American 100-miler starts in the morning. Yeah. And so, think about a Western States runner, like they're finishing when the sun is setting. Mm-hmm. And here, the sun was setting and they're 20K into the race. And so it was a totally different mind shift.
It's just a big learning curve for the Americans when they come over here. And we're definitely still learning, especially on the men's side. Keith, one of the things you and I have been talking about is just how this has turned into just the most international of endurance events. And you shared a fun anecdote of 2010 when Tsuyoshi Kaburagi, a friend of both of ours and a great representative of the sport in Japan, came over, and using that maybe as an example of how this went from being a very French event to what it is now in the World Championship.
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things early on was like in the meetings with Catherine, we were saying, right, Catherine, we're going to make this race no longer be French. And then I had to quickly quantify what we meant by that at the North Face before being kicked out of the room in terms of, this event is incredible and we need to share this with the world. And one of the natures of the North Face being a global brand is we can use our athletes and our reach to do that. And so Kaburaki, a great athlete and also the race director of the UTMF in around Mont Fuji, was here. He was followed by NHK, which is the national TV station of Japan. And, those guys, it was kind of like a Ferrari pit stop when he got into any of the aid stations with cameras, boom, lighting. And 2010 was a defining moment for the UTMB in many ways because if you look at the safety protocol that's in place in 2023, a lot of that was the catalyst from 2010. So 2010, the runners set off. The weather forecast was not good, but it was not exceptional. There's no red flags for the meteorologists working inside. When the runners got to Lake Contamine, kilometer 31 into the race, or 20 miles into the race, they stopped the race. So imagine you're stood in front of this train of 2,300 runners coming at you and you're saying, stop. Killian's into the aid station first and he's like, I want to carry on. And they're like, no, you need to stop. It is snowing like crazy on the pass and we're going to stop the race. The mayor of Chamonix is on the phone to anyone that owns a bus. Get every single bus down there. We have got 2,300 wet, cold runners. But one of the defining moments for me was Kaburaki and Sebastian had been already over to Mont Fuji. So Seb had built this fantastic relationship with Kaburaki. I don't think it was
Who's the race director of UTMF.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think there was a great deal of communication in terms of verbally because Kaburaki doesn't speak much English and Seb's English is okay. And but those two guys were huddled up. And they were in tears because if you think about any runner can identify with this story in your UTMB, you've trained for this. You've probably upset whoever's around you, your network, because you're so dedicated. You come here, the race stops. All of your dreams have been stopped by something completely out of your control. So it was a really powerful moment. And the extension of that story was SMS was not really that well done that time, and it wasn't working for international folk. So the amount of people then that were getting an SMS saying, hey, the race is going to start again tomorrow morning, everybody didn't get that message. So there was a lot of people in the bars of Chamonix drowning their sorrows, while some people did get it. So of the 2,300 that stopped, I think we got about 1,300 back on the start line the next morning in Courmayeur, and we managed to get a race finish in 2010. Jez Bragg won the shortened edition. Mike Wolf, I think, was second, and Lizzy also. So it was a British win for the two runners there. So, but there were so many things, and the key challenge for the UTMB organization after that, from a risk management, was we need to guarantee that if the runners spend all this time coming to our race, we need to guarantee them a race. How do we do that? We have the classic route, but then we also have a low-level option right the way around the course. So they kind of went through that, and 2011 was the first test of that, a race that never left France.
Yep.
Not a very exciting race for the runners on a lot of kind of service roads, but they kind of delivered on that. So there was a lot happened in 2010 that made what the runners are going to experience this year, they're going to get a race. They've already changed the course. So,
one of the themes that Corinne and I talked about yesterday is just how international this has become. And I think Tsuyoshi Kaburagi was instrumental in being sort of one of those foreign runners to come over here and perform well and come over many times. He did the same thing at Western States. I remember when he finished second place there. I think it was behind Hal Kerner in 2008. Jess Bragg did the same, was a UK athlete who came over. And that was sort of the dawn of this internationalization of the sport. And now, of course, the professionals are racing internationally multiple times a year in a lot of cases. We've mentioned Lizzy's name a couple of times, and you guys have a fun story about Lizzy. And I think, for those who are newer to the sport, they may have never heard her name, but for those of us who have been around a little bit, we know what a legend Lizzy Hawker is. So Toph, maybe paint or add any color that you have about Lizzy Hawker, and I want to tell the specific story that you guys have.
Well, I mean, Lizzy is, she's the winningest UTMB champion on the women's side in history. She's got 5 UTMB
the winningest
wins.
No matter what. I mean, Francois and Killian both have 4. Lizzy's got 5.
Winningest outright. Yeah. She is one of the most wonderful, sweet, understated, mild-mannered, absolute beast of a competitor. And her first year, she was an unsponsored. Her first year she won. She was an unsponsored runner running with basically like a school day pack around the Mont Blanc with her mandatory kit, and just quietly beat absolutely every professional out there and virtually every male runner out there as well, and finished with an impressive win. Of course, we, being a brand always on the lookout for new talent, I think immediately made the connection with her, and she became a North Face athlete. And so the second or third year she was running, I think Kim was crewing Lizzy, and in Simone Moro, one of our mountaineering athletes.
Legendary alpinist.
Yes, yeah. And so she had an incredible sort of crew managing her race. And these were the early days of North Face and early days of all the brands. Like, everyone's trying to figure out the gear. Like, what's the right gear? And, what's the optimized backpack? All the gear is so specialized now. Like, the pockets are in exactly the right place. Your jacket goes here. We were still basically using mountain biking equivalent sort of hydration packs. And so Lizzy was out running that year, and we had this specialized pack, but it didn't quite fit her. So she just tied the front of the pack onto her body in knots. And I'll never forget, we're running down just this first 5K, and I just see the pack sort of bouncing. And I thought, oh my God, we definitely didn't make that the right size. I don't know how she's gonna be doing. But she gets over to Courmayeur, and Kim and Simone, literally, they were trading out her pack for a smaller one. They had to cut it off her body because it was tied in such a knot. So they cut it off her body, and they're doing a pack transfer of things. And they tell this story because we stayed at the Hotel Alpina, and the Hotel Alpina has this super heavy, weight for the key. And she had the key with the giant metal weight, like the rock weight, and a full-size apple, and you're just, these days everyone is
like
optimizing.
A wooden cross in the bag too.
A wooden cross. Yep, she had a wooden cross, like full-size wooden cross in the back of the bag as well. And Simone and Kim are sort of doing the transfer, you don't need the key. We'll just have this for you at the finish. But it was so cool because it was just indicative of like the trial and error and the learning process, even for elites and everyone in between. Now everyone's a gram counter and everything is perfectly optimized.
Everybody's got like everything packed into the most specialized, smallest size that they can. They buy the cell phones that are microscopic just to satisfy the equipment.
But she won that year, and just an incredibly humble champion. I think Keith talks about the spirit of trail running, the values. I think every champion that has come and won UTMB is a part of bringing the values of the sport to this event. And she's certainly one of the most incredible champions the race has ever had, and anyone that's lucky enough to know her or get to know her will see the true spirit of trail running, mountain running, and a great representative of the sport. And I hope we get to see her back here this week.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Lizzy's going to be here because this is the UTMB in 2023 would be Lizzy's idea of an ultimate nightmare. And Lizzy now is a race director in her own right, and Lizzy used to go and run around
Ultra Tour
Monte Rosa. So Lizzy used to use that. That was where Lizzy used to train for the UTMB, and there's not so many people over on those trails, and so Lizzy's created this stage race. And and if you talk
people love that event,
and if you talk about a race director and their values, Lizzy's race, the Ultra Tour Monte Rosa, I had the pleasure to help Lizzy and Richard for the first 3 or 4 years when they were starting up and that, because neither Lizzy or Richard liked talking to people. So I got to do the talking on their behalf at the event. And one last thing on Lizzy was the Sunday Times. They did a huge article on Lizzy, the biggest selling newspaper in the UK. And it was headlined, the most famous British runner you've never heard of. And they were just kind of highlighting that Lizzy goes under the radar. She's just a very humble, wonderful human being. And actually, most of the people, in fact, all of the people that go to do her race do it first of all because of Lizzy.
Yeah.
And then when they're there, they're like, wow, Lizzy, thank you for sharing this place with us. So no, Lizzy Hawker, 5 times champion.
You crewed for her a couple of times here.
Yeah, I 2011, I think 2012, I think I had Lizzy's mum and dad in the car with me, and Lizzy was racing. And so I was just saying for the audience, if running the race is just not something you're ever going to do, the second best experience is being the crew for somebody. It's a great experience. And also there's a sense of responsibility. Do not be late to that aid station, but you have a role to play. And so I had the pleasure with Lizzy. It was the year they closed the Bovine climb. So I didn't want to tell Lizzy that. I said, hey, Lizzy, good news. You don't have to go up the Bovine climb. But I didn't tell her what the plan B was. I said, just keep following the markers. They ran all the way down to Martigny. And basically the start of the the MCC of yesterday. So when Lizzy arrived in Martigny, she wasn't happy with me. But luckily, her mom had told me that her favorite song was Queen, Don't Stop Me Now. So I had that blazing out of the car. Come on, Lizzy. And she swore. The only time I've ever heard Lizzy swear, she swore at me then about when we got to, but she made it and she went on to win. And her mum kept saying, Keith, Lizzy's not eating much. I'm like, well, no, that's Lizzy. But no, it was great for Lizzy's parents to see their daughter in her natural environment, and also thousands of people cheering Lizzy. That was a brilliant moment for her parents.
I don't know Lizzy super well personally, but it strikes me that a 5-time champion. Harmony and I have been talking about this too, like with Rory Bozio, who won in 2013, 2014. Lizzy winning 5 times, Rory winning twice. Both of them could have milked that and created this mystique around them and sort of continue to ride those accomplishments for years and decades to come. Both have chosen to sort of move on with their lives, still mountain people, still enjoying running for what it is and what it brings to their lives, no longer seeking the spotlight. And I think both are not only great champions of the sport, but great representatives of just that humble trail spirit. We could go forever on this. I think we all understand. I want to sort of figure out where we should draw the line. There's some things that I definitely want to talk about, though. Keith, obviously, like the evolution of the broadcast, since that's now the way that the vast majority of the world will experience UTMB this week. I'd love to also talk about, like, there's some other characters like Marco Olmo, and sort of like he won 2006, 2007, and then Killian arrives 2008 and sort of ushers in this new generation. And then, like, now are we sort of seeing this next generation after Killian starting to emerge? So maybe let's use those as our last two topics, starting with the broadcast. Keith, like I said, you've been around since the very beginning. Maybe just tell the people how that's evolved over the years.
Yeah, so 2014, that was the last year of the North Face being the title sponsor, and I understood the strategic decision of the brand, but boy, I was really sad. But so I said to Catherine and Michelle, hey, if you've got a cool job, I come back next year. And they said, next year we're going to do for the first time, we're going to do live broadcast of UTMB. So why don't you do it? So Topher's brother, Randy, and myself. So there was like 2015. Fixed cameras in the aid stations. That's what UTMB Live looked like in 2015. So we'd be on, we'd watch the leaders go through, and then so, okay, we'll see you in 3 more hours when the runners get to the next aid station. Fast forward to 2023, and in that time, we've had wonderful people in the studio. Yourself, Corinne was a guest, and we're like, Corinne, this is you. And so and Corinne now has absolutely taken that, and you and Corinne, dynamic duo, and Corinne in her own right is an amazing
and
journalist.
You're fantastic too, Keith.
Yeah, no, but I obviously, but I'm not going to say that. Yeah. But and the fact that now it is in 6 or 7 languages. I heard Corinne say 7 languages yesterday. So
they added Thai this year.
Okay, so we've got 7 languages. The studio set up. The fact that we're now broadcasting through YouTube. So we as when we're speaking, we can engage with the audience, and we have so much fun with the audience. They're giving us so much intel. We're like, hey, who's the guy with the hat? The Greek guy. And then the Greek trail running community, oh yeah, this is Fotis, and this is what he does. So they're asking about nutrition and products. So and now I think the viewing figures for UTMB Live is something like 20 million or something across all of the different touch points. So this is such a great...
I think the broadcast alone was like 2.5 or 3 million last year.
If you talk about inspiring the next generation, and we're now getting ready for Friday, Courtney Dauwalter, we're talking about inspiring the next generation of female athletes, whoever. Last night I had the pleasure to see Zach Friedley, an adaptive athlete with a blade, finish the MCC. So this sport and this event with the live broadcast now, we don't even know some of the people that are watching this. And so I'm very conscious, and I think, and Corinne too, is when we're talking, we're geeking out on the stats, but we're also talking to people that are just watching this for the first time because they're like, hey, watch this, is amazing. So it's such a great opportunity for us, and it's a great opportunity for the sport. And I know that you've got this great line about, trail running is going to save the world. And I kind of love that. So it's such an honor for us and to be sharing this. It's so exciting. And, the three of us, you, Corinne, and I think 2 or 3 years ago, Corinne's like, we didn't take a break. And we were fine with that because you're addicted to it like anything else. So no, we've got a bit more structure now. So in terms of having a break and everything else.
I remember in 2015, I think actually it was the 3 of us in the studio that year. And we were watching the steady cam from the flagere that was just pointed backwards towards the Tete Devant, waiting to see Xavier Thevenard come down. Now we've got camera runners and e-bikes following a lot of the leaders throughout the day. You and I were talking about Sebastian Chegno. You've brought up his name a couple of times.
Yeah.
And again, a great representative of the sport, a multiple-time podium finisher here.
Yep.
Now, I recall seeing him here in 2021 while he was out carrying the camera, and he had done like 140K in 3 days chasing athletes, giving back to the sport.
It's incredible. Just the ability, this course is so unique because it's got cellular coverage during the entire course, which allows the most incredible live footage of any event in the world. And then you have these incredibly talented elite runners that are following the front of the race. And I remember talking to Seb, he was following OCC. Like the OCC course, there isn't as much, cushion for an elite cameraman with an elite runner. Yeah. But you'd sort of mentioned like, hey, it's amazing how this race has become so international. I think a huge part of that is the live broadcast. A huge part of that is the capability and reach of social media, that on the positive side, and the interconnectivity that the web really emerged with smartphone technology in 2007. It built on that in the 2010s, and that just exploded this experience for people to see firsthand on their phone what was going on in these different parts of the world.
It changes the whole game, doesn't it? I mean, I really do think this advent of live stream broadcasting, particularly at a race like UTMB, that captures the human imagination, that has the highest level of competition, and is executed in the most beautiful landscape you could possibly imagine. When you package that all together in a broadcast experience and show it to somebody who would otherwise, sign up for a turkey trot, it really does capture their imagination. And it's great to have people like Keith and Corinne in the studio to help share the values, share the story, and share why this is important, why it's going to save the world, right, Keith?
What was good for the three of us last week was, on the other side, when we're kind of on the trail, you're bumping into backpackers and you're explaining, we're here for the race and I'm going to be doing the broadcasting. And they're like, the hikers who are not interested in running are like, we want to watch that because if the footage is that good, we get to see where we've been hiking. And so all of a sudden, this is the ultimate advertising to come visit. So the mayor of Chamonix, Eric Fournier, big thumbs up from him for all of this, because this is the ultimate marketing tool. Yeah. And this has set an expectation now for any race around the world. It's like, hey, is there a live stream of this event? Totally. And if you look at Istria 100 this year, they did live, the aerial footage of the blue water of the Adriatic Ocean is the ultimate marketing tool for your event if you have the budget. And now it's almost, and the UTMB has always been a mandatory kit, qualifying points, race series, live stream. They've always had an opportunity, and sometimes they've missed it to actually influence the sport in a positive way, but they've also delivered some good ones. So I think that's been the power of UTMB Live.
Amazing. All right, guys. So final topic here before we have to wind it down is just any comments on sort of the rotation of generations. Marco Olmo famously winning the race in his 60s, and then Kilian comes out of nowhere in 2008, a 20-year-old. Now Kilian, of course, wins again last year, 14 years after his first victory. But we are seeing this new crop of professionals coming in, and things are continually changing, and this is the 20th year. Any comments on just like the macro view, the rotation of generations, and the 20-year journey as we close?
I think the sport as a whole is evolved, and it accelerated in the 2000s and again the 2010s. I mean, back in the 2000s, 100-mile running and even UTMB was an adventure and exploration. Like that first year, like you said, they designed the race to finish you could finish in Courmayeur and Champex-Lac because they weren't sure if it could even be done. There were 67 finishers out of 722 starters that year that made it back to Chamonix. And so there was this sense of adventure.
10% finisher rate?
Yeah, that first year. I mean, the Lizzy Hawker story about like still figuring the backpacks out, like everything was an adventure and exploration. Like in over the years, it became more and more optimized. And certainly Marco Olmo, I think some people look at like, well, those early years, it must have been, couldn't have been that competitive if a 58-year-old going into a 60-year-old was still racing for the top three positions. The reality is Marco Olmo, if you look at his background, was an absolute, legend, badass ultra runner. and Dawa Sherpa, Vincent Dalabar, Christophe Jacquard, all these guys in their era, Corinne Favre, these were incredibly talented athletes in their day. And I don't think there's anything diminished there. I just think the sport continued to professionalize, and athletes got professionalized coaching, the gear, all of the brands were optimizing, all of the nutrition brands were optimizing. And
everybody's doing the recce route now.
Exactly. So. And then you had social media. And so that next generation of younger athletes was discovering this as a form of, really a new way to get into a new sport. And then it just accelerated. And you had, of course, the era of Killian and then it's just continued. I was joking with Katie Scheid, the 22 champion. I mean, if you ask someone like, where were you in 2003? It's like, well, Katie Scheid was an 11-year-old in 2003. Like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of like, whoa. And she was the, 2022 champion. And that is cool, and
awesome.
that just shows you like this sport has built generational staying power, and I think we as a sport really honor those people that have come before us, and we celebrate always the new energy. Like there is always the next young gun that's coming.
Yeah.
And now more so than ever. Yeah. And it's really cool to see here.
It's funny, we had Amanda Basham and Justin Grunwald in here doing an interview yesterday, and one of the things Amanda said, because she had 2 children in the last 3 years, is like, when I was having my kids, the sport leveled up. So I didn't just need to like get back to where I was. I needed to get back to where I was and then eclipse it, which I think is sort of similar to what you're saying. It's just continually, incrementally improving. Keith, any closing comments here?
Yeah, as we set ourselves up now for the UTMB World Series events here with the OCC, CCC, and UTMB, I also think the pandemic, all athletes stayed close to home, and everyone was focused on FKTs. And coming out of that pandemic, everybody was quicker. And I think it was almost a moment where people had time to breathe. They were working less because of the pandemic anyway. So all of a sudden, people were outside, were reflecting maybe on nutrition, every aspect of their game. And then once we came out of the pandemic, everybody became a super trail runner. And I think we're going to see that now is, the strength, the youth coming through. It's I think the pandemic was almost like a reset moment. You had the pioneer years at the beginning. Then there was the 2010s where it was just evolving in a classic organic way. And then I think the pandemic reset, and then bang. And I think what we're going to see on Friday now, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, is almost a spin-off of that. UTMB World Series. And these athletes now are just, the depth we're going to see is like, wow, such a change from 2003. So that's I think that's been a key thing as well.
Well, guys, this has been so freaking fun. I'm just looking at my notes here, and I have like 10,000 other things I would love to get to with you. So we'll have to do another round 2, maybe before the race next year. But what a joy it's been, and I appreciate you both for making the time this morning. Toph, congrats on your awesome run yesterday. And Keith, we'll look forward to listening to your voice throughout race week on the broadcast.
Oh, yeah.
Love the conversation.
Yeah, before we get going, just a quick couple of notes for our listeners here. This afternoon, we're going to be doing tons of athlete interviews. So we're going to speak to Heather Jackson, Pau Capel, Eden Nilsson, Hannes Nomberger, Helen Mino-Faulkner, Courtney DeWalter, and Kevin Schmidt. They're all going to be here in studio, so you can keep an eye out for all those interviews as they drop on our YouTube channel and in the podcast feed. Also, make sure you go play fantasy trail running this week. We have awesome prizes on offer from our great partners at Hoka and Camelback. We're picking 10 deep in all of the UTMB World Series events. That's OCC, CCC, UTMB. So pick 10 deep for both the men and women for all 3 of those races for a chance to win a head-to-toe kit from Hoka. That includes footwear, so cap all the way down to a brand new pair of Stinson 7 trail shoes, Zephyr Pack from Camelback. I think we also have some ketones from HVMN, Ketone IQ supplement. we'll probably throw some Freetrail merch in there too. So make sure you go to fantasy.freetrail.com. Big shout out to Travis Longcar for all the hard work he's put in over there, fantasy.freetrail.com, to play with us this week. Finally, a big thank you to our sponsors, Hoka and Camelback. Like I mentioned, Stinson 7, that's the shoe that Hoka's really proud of right now. A great all-arounder road to trail shoe. We've got them sitting behind Keith and Topher here, so make sure you go check that out. They're also doing a cool thing, like an augmented reality experience that you can check out at HokaAthleteTrainingCamp.com. Of course, Hoka, one of the premier sponsors here at the UTMB, born here in France, and a great brand that's done a lot to build our sport. Similarly with Camelback, a big thank you for their support. A big thank you to the people behind the scenes, Harmony, Ryan, you guys are great. For Keith Byrne, Topher Gaylord, I'm Dylan Bowman. See you guys tomorrow.